different things about my dad, and if you have any questions about his life or whatever. One of the things was when I would go to the shows with them, and fans would always come up to me and say, how does it feel to be the son of the great Martin Nodell, creator of the Green Lantern? And I'd laugh and I'd go, like any other kid growing up in the 1950s and early 60s, you wanted to stay away, as far away from your father as possible. I said, I was no different than any other kid, And one of the funny things is, I did not know that my dad did the comic books. He would always deny it, because in the first book it says Martin Nodell as his name. It just kind of switched around the letters in Nodell, and he kept denying it. Oh no, that wasn't me. That wasn't me. Basically, my dad wanted to go into advertising, which he did, and he did not want to have anything to do with the comic books. And it wasn't until a gentleman by the name of Gary Calabono in Chicago area, who was actually working at a newspaper my dad was doing layouts for. And my dad was going to leave the Chicago area. It had gotten too cold for him. And they had a company little newspaper. And it said, Martin Nodell is retiring. And they asked him to do a little bio. And he put that he had done the Green Lantern. And one of the space salesmen comes running in with a tape recorder and goes, I didn't know you were that Martin Nodell. And he did a long interview of my dad at that point. And then my dad got into doing the shows, I guess sometime in the 1980s. He got into doing shows. But the biggest thing was, he did, when he started Green Lantern, before that, he was doing stage bills for plays on Broadway. He did a lot of caricatures of different stars and people. And he got to meet a lot of these people because his uncle, a man by the name of Dave Apollon, was of Vaudevillian, and a famous mandolin player. And he knew all the famous people of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all these, like, Bob Hope and all these people. And so my dad, as a young man, would go to all the stage shows and everything else. And so he got real interested in doing, like, you do these stage bills. And then he looked for work, and he was basically looking for commercial work. And he really didn't get anything in New York. And he went and decided, well, I'll try some comic strips. And he did. You've got a copy of one comic strip up there?
This was something from it.
Okay. But he did some, was it the comic strip Johnny Rogers?
That was after 1945.
Okay, that was later. But
he did a couple.
He did a couple of earlier comic strips, and he brought them to different publishers, and nothing got published. And finally, he took 3 pages up to the forerunner of DC Comics, and the publisher told him, well, get started. Let's get a book out of this. And so my dad went home and said, "Oh, this is great," but the publisher decided that he needed someone to help him with the scripting, and that's when they brought in Bill Finger. And Bill Finger is famous for Batman and all kinds of other things. And my dad really didn't know Bill Finger. You would think that people who worked together for several years would actually know each other. And I think he said, well, yeah, I met Bill Finger twice. He would talk to him on the phone, or my mother would go up to the DC office and pick up the scripts. And then he would do the artwork, and then my mother would return the artwork. So my father hardly ever went into the office in New York, and just about everything in the comic books was New York based. They were all in New York. And he did Green Lantern for about 7 years. And he did it actually to the year I was born. And then he was unemployed that whole year. Not a good year to be unemployed when your youngest child is born, I guess. But he would go and look for commercial work. You know, he wanted to do advertising. And so he'd be on Madison Avenue in New York, and he'd be looking for work. And he knew Stan Lee, and Stan was walking down, because their offices were fairly close to each other in New York, and Stan came over to my dad and said, we need some people. Why don't you come up to Timely? And so my dad worked in the bullpen, and he did Captain America and a whole bunch of other Timely books. And in fact, on one book, he was like the art director for some romance book. And basically, in the Timely books, no one was given any credit for anything. It was always like the Marvel way of doing things. And Stan would walk around and hand out the pages to everybody. And I remember my dad, Timely was really a shoestring operation, where they would kind of go out of business every time after they had printed books, when the books would be on newsstands, and the newsstand people wouldn't pay them right away, and they wouldn't have money to publish new books until the newsstand vendors paid them. So he related a story to me one time that Stan was walking around the office in the bullpen, and he fires one guy picks up his pencils and a little envelope and walks out. Next guy, Stan walks up to the next guy, and the guy walks out with all his whatever, because they used their own pencils and stuff at the time. And then Stan would get visibly sick and go to the washroom, come back 15 minutes later, and so then he comes up to my dad, and my dad's packing up his stuff already, and he goes, "I know, Stan, bye, see you later." But they actually rehired all those guys, like I guess Carl Burgos, and there were a bunch of guys. I don't remember all their names, but
What was the one gentleman that went to Chinatown? What was his name?
Freddie Yang was another artist that was also in the bullpen. There was a whole bunch of really great artists in the bullpen, and the bullpen kept changing, you know. But then he was working freelance for Timely, and then he got a big break. He got a job with the Princeton Film Center, doing layouts for the Nike missile. And these were layouts that were to be presented to the Department of Defense and to see what the missile would look like. Yeah, they were very conscious of how they wanted this thing to look. So he did a whole bunch of layouts for them. And it was interesting because he was working on a missile, he had to have a security clearance. And you know, the FBI shows up at the apartment building he's living in and going around to all the neighbors and saying, well, this is the FBI, and we want to know about Martin Nodell. And this was an apartment building with about 60 tenants, and they're all gossiping about what's going on with the FBI and Martin Nodell. But he worked there for doing the Nike, and then it was a short-term project. But then he went on to doing a lot of advertising work, and then finally he got a job with a company, Cunningham and Walsh, in New York, and he worked there for I don't know, 5, 6 years, maybe 7 years.